The government relaxes the employment support scheme to allow more employees to benefit from it. Disbursement of the first vouchers under a new round of the consumption voucher scheme. And the number of new COVID infections continues to decline.
Good evening. New changes to the government's employment support scheme will allow more employees to benefit from it.
But questions remain as to whether the changes mean a departure from a scheme originally intended to keep smaller businesses afloat. Jackie Lin with more.
Companies could receive $8,000 for each of their eligible worker every month between May and July. That's only for workers earning less than $30,000 a month. Now the government has decided to do away with the monthly wage cap after consulting the stakeholders. That means what's intended to be a financial lifeline to small and medium-sized companies will now encompass large corporations with high-earning individuals.
The labor sector stresses there should be no more manipulation by the employers concerning ESS. So we will make sure that the $8,000 or $4,000 will reach the employees.
The number of employees for each company to benefit from the scheme will be capped at 1,000. For sectors suffering less during the pandemic, the cap will be 100 employees. They include private hospitals, supermarkets, pharmacies, and security guard agencies. Previously, such companies were either entirely excluded from the scheme, or only those hiring fewer than 50 employees could apply. Now employers can also file applications on behalf of their part-timers and freelancers, with the monthly handouts per worker halved at $4,000. The self-employed and employees above the age of 65 can also benefit from the scheme if they have an MPF account. Under the revamped scheme, the number of beneficiaries will stand at 1.74 million, up from the previous 1.3 million. The chief executive maintains the wider eligibility allows more fairness for all businesses, comparing the subsidy scheme to tax breaks for all companies. But Simon Lee, an academic in business at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, believes there should be more targeted help for businesses hard hit by the pandemic. And that could be objectively assessed by comparing taxes filed or revenues earned before and during the pandemic. The government's finalized proposal will be taken to the Finance Committee of the Legislative Council for vetting next Tuesday. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
The government began dispersing the first half of the $10,000 consumption vouchers to eligible Hong Kongers today.
However, people who chose to receive the vouchers through octopus cards may have to pay attention to the complexities of the collection mechanism. Christy Khan reports.
The government had earlier announced it will dish out the $10,000 consumption vouchers to eligible Hong Kong residents in 2 installments. About 6.3 million residents received either or parts of the first batch of the $5,000 vouchers today.
People using Alipay, Tap and Go, and WeChat Pay should have already received the $5,000 voucher in 1 installment. Those who chose to receive the voucher via the octopus card will have to tap their cards several times to receive the full amount.
This morning, some residents were busy queuing up to collect their e-vouchers through the subsidy collection points at MTR stations. But some of them found they couldn't get the promised amount. Staff at the MTR had to explain the situation to them. Those who have chosen to receive the money through octopus cards will be able to get the first batch of $4,000 by tapping their cards. However, the stored value limit of octopus card is $3,000, so people will have to retap the cards to get the uncollected amount later. They can collect the remaining $1,000 batch on 16th of June at the earliest, given they have spent the first installment. Residents in general were happy to receive the e-vouchers.
I do appreciate that the government have this consumption voucher and very on time because I already got the $5,000 on yesterday night. So I plan to might be to buy some of my personal belonging or some necessarily that I need for the daily using.
Others didn't mind the fact that the $10,000 vouchers will be handed out separately in 2 installments.
I prefer getting it in 2 separate installments because I suppose the money won't expire that soon, so that we can have more options later. We did not need to spend all the money in one go.
The current batch of consumption vouchers will be valid for 7 months until the 31st of October. The government has not yet announced the details of the second installment. Christy Khan, TVB News.
The city reported 2,644 new cases of COVID-19 today, including 12 imported infections, as the daily caseload continues to decline.
Meanwhile, a government scientific committee recommends that people aged 60 or above should receive a 4th dose of either the Sinovac or BioNTech vaccine at least 3 months after their 3rd dose.
Among the latest locally acquired infections, around half of them are identified through nucleic acid tests, and the other half are patients who used rapid test kits. Health authorities urged residents to perform rapid antigen tests themselves for 3 days starting tomorrow, as it would help identify silent transmission in Hong Kong. On Wednesday, 90 more COVID patients died in public hospitals, with the youngest one being a 27-year-old man suffering from asthma. Meanwhile, health officials elaborated on the latest suggestion made by the Scientific Committee on Vaccine-Preventable Diseases.
Persons aged 60 years or above are recommended to receive the 4th dose 3 months after the 3rd dose. This is taken into account of the high mortality rate among the elderly, and also in the current epidemic. According to the local data, we found that the attack rate as well as the case fatality rate is very high among persons aged 60 years or above.
The same principle would also be applied to people aged 60 or above who have recovered from COVID-19.
Residents who have not received the government's anti-epidemic service packs can pick one up at the 89 collection centers across town starting today. Long queues could be seen outside some of the centers before they open this morning. People could either present their collection cards or register with their personal information on the spot to get the packs. The government had earlier said more flexibility could be allowed during distribution. One man said his family of 7 has been given extra packs of rapid test kits upon request. To complement the 3-day citywide testing exercise, the opening hours at collection stations will be extended to 9 p.m.
The mainland reported about 23,000 COVID cases today. Around 20,000 of the infections were recorded in Shanghai. Shanghai is currently the epicenter of China's new COVID outbreak. The financial hub, which has been under a phased lockdown, identified more than 19,000 asymptomatic infections during citywide mass testing. Local authorities said they will continue to conduct mass PCR tests. They gave assurance that there will be enough supply of daily necessities for the city's 25 million residents. Meanwhile, more makeshift hospitals have been set up to provide around 60,000 beds for people who need to undergo isolation.
Potential chief executive candidate John Lee is setting up campaign headquarters at the Central Plaza office tower in Wan Chai. Reports say Tam Yu-chung, Hong Kong's only delegate to the National People's Congress Standing Committee, will be Lee's campaign office director. Lee, who is still awaiting Beijing's approval of his resignation as Chief Secretary of Administration, went to the Wan Chai office building this morning, accompanied by several people. Security officers were seen at what's believed to be Lee's campaign office. Tam Yu-chung said he will assist Lee. Meanwhile, in submissions to the Registration and Electoral Office, Lee has delegated 3 agents to handle his election expenses, capped at $17.6 million. The agents include former Secretary General of LegCo Pauline Ng, CPP-CC member Eliza Chan, and Sino Group's Daryl Ng.
The government has announced new details about the return to in-person classes in schools. Secretary for Education Kevin Yeung said in a LegCo meeting that on the 19th of April, senior classes in primary schools are likely to resume half-day of face-to-face teaching. On the 3rd of May, all grades in primary schools will return to school. 1 week later, lower years in secondary schools can have half days. And on the 16th or 17th of May, all schools will have half days of face-to-face teaching.
Still ahead on tonight's news. The United States imposes more sanctions on Russia, with Putin's 2 adult daughters among the targets. European authorities investigate salmonella cases linked to Kinder chocolate eggs. And the former Baptist University Students' Union president sentenced to 9 months in jail.
Welcome back to TVB News. As Ukraine braces for a battle with Russian forces over besieged regions in the country's east, residents in the north are only beginning to confront the aftermath of the invasion.
Russia's 6-week-long invasion has so far forced more than 4 million to flee abroad, killed or injured thousands, and left a quarter of the population homeless.
Drone video from Ukraine's Ministry of Defense captures some of the destruction in Borodyanko, a town near Kiev, which was occupied by Russian forces but is now back under the Ukrainian flag. More apocalyptic scenes in the northern city of Chernihiv, where residents are collecting rainwater to drink. Damaged buildings can be restored, but it's hard to overcome the mental shock, says Serhiy. Even though the Russians left, he says his traumatized neighbor still won't leave her basement. How do you cope without water and electricity? You put on a hat, warm clothes, and go to bed, says Victor. In the town of Bucha, locals are only beginning to comprehend the horror. Dozens of body bags containing the remains of civilians allegedly killed by Russian occupying forces are being collected as authorities work to identify the victims. As investigators begin to collect evidence amid the death and devastation, Ukraine's top prosecutor says justice will be pursued at the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
We have 4 big categories of crimes, all of them, of course, murders, rapes, tortures, everything we have. Yesterday we found the grave where the family, they were tortured, and of course we will investigate it.
Ukraine's president, meanwhile, says Kremlin forces are trying to cover up evidence of atrocities. In a daily video address, Volodymyr Zelensky claimed the Russian military is now trying to remove people who have been killed from streets and basements in an attempt to hide the evidence. Ukraine wants sanctions crippling enough to force Russia to end its war, after accusing some countries of putting economic well-being above punishment for civilian killings. Moscow has denied targeting civilians and says images of bodies in Bucha were staged to justify more sanctions against Russia and derail peace talks.
The U.S. imposed more sanctions on Russia in relation to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Among the targets, the Russian president's 2 adult daughters.
The European Union is also set to halt coal imports from Russia. Daniel Rowell tells us more.
The US has imposed another string of financial sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine and alleged war crimes. US President Joe Biden said the move would place a lasting penalty on the country's economy. The new American sanctions target Russia's Sberbank and Alfa Bank. Sberbank holds 1/3 of Russia's total banking assets. Alfa Bank is the country's 4th largest financial institution. Still, Washington said energy transactions were exempted from the new punishment. The White House also sanctioned Russian President Vladimir Putin's 2 adult daughters.
This represents a new stage in the sanctions because these are the institutions used by Russians, not just the Russian elite. However, these penalties also apply to the Russian elite, and more particularly their children. The Biden administration is going after the 2 adult daughters of Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is a very interesting move forward because often Russian oligarchs use their children as a means of hiding assets from authorities.
Furthermore, the US Senate is set to take up legislation which will end normal trade relations with Russia. Another bill will ban the importation of Russian oil. Said trade suspension measure would allow President Biden to impose higher tariffs on certain Russian imports. Meanwhile, the UK also froze Sberbank's assets. The British government also outlined plans to prohibit imports of Russian coal by the end of the year. This as well as announcing a ban on British investment in Russia. The European Union is likely to follow suit with similar measures, among them a ban on new investment in Russia. Additionally, the bloc is looking to halt coal imports from Russia. Once approved, it would be Brussels' first ban on any import of energy from Russia since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. During a NATO meeting, the EU's chief diplomat Josep Borrell said the package could be passed on Thursday or Friday. Borrell also said the EU will discuss an embargo on Russian oil. There is, however, still some debate in Brussels over natural gas sanctions. A consensus on the matter has so far been hard to secure, as Germany, the bloc's largest economy, is heavily dependent on Russian gas. Daniel Rowell, TVB News.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary says Russia should be expelled from the Group of 20 Major Economies Forum, adding the United States will boycott a number of G20 meetings if Russian officials show up. Janet Yellen made the remarks before the House Financial Services Committee as part of her annual testimony on the state of the international financial system.
Russia's actions, including the atrocities committed against the innocent Ukrainians in Bucha, are reprehensible, represent an unacceptable affront to the rules-based global order, and will have enormous economic repercussions in Ukraine and beyond. Spillovers from the crisis are heightening economic vulnerabilities in many countries that are already facing higher debt burdens and limited policy options as they recover from COVID-19.
Russian lawmakers have introduced a bill into the lower parliament house that aims to tighten curbs on media outlets in the country and their coverage of the war in Ukraine. The bill outlined media law amendments that would give the Russian Prosecutor General's office more power to shut down domestic and foreign media outlets. The criteria for doing so under the bill would include coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine that deviates from the official line. That's in addition to content that discredits the Russian military and its actions in Ukraine. The bill could also be retaliation for Russian media outlets being shut down abroad. The bill must pass 3 readings in the State Duma, Russia's lower house of parliament, and then be approved by the country's upper house, the Federation Council. It would then be signed by President Vladimir Putin. The process could take months or days.
European health officials are investigating a rapidly evolving outbreak of salmonella in more than 130 children that appears to be linked to chocolate Easter eggs with a surprise toy inside. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control said the products were identified as the likely route of infection. Officials say the outbreaks has led to an unusually high proportion of children being hospitalized. Product recalls have started in several countries, and British authorities say Italian company Ferrero has begun recalling specific batches of Kinder Surprise chocolate eggs. The agency has not singled out Ferrero or any other company, but warns that the reported cases are mostly among children under 10 years old. Former Hong Kong Baptist University Students' Union President Keith Fong was today sentenced to 9 months in prison for resisting arrest and perverting the course of justice. Fong was charged with possession of offensive weapons in a public place, that's 10 laser pointers, near Ableu Street in Sham Shui Po in 2019. He was acquitted of that charge. However, he was accused of obstructing police investigation by trying to escape and resetting his phone before it was seized as evidence. Judge Douglas Yao said Fong had told the police that the laser pointers were to be used during stargazing, when in fact they were intended for use during protests. On the charge of perverting the course of justice, the judge believes the 23-year-old committed the crime not because he was nervous at the time. Instead, the judge noted that Fong had removed a SIM card from a phone with a paperclip-like tool while he was in a hospital after his arrest, which shows his action was premeditated. That's the news. Thanks for watching.
Good night.